In the most recent episode of Tucker Carlson Tonight, Marjorie Taylor Greene took the stage to deliver an extensive and scathing critique of the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, or AIPAC, a lobbying organization that has long been recognized as one of the most powerful foreign influence groups operating within the United States, particularly with respect to shaping U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East and fostering a close, unwavering alliance with the State of Israel. Greene's comments were not just a passing remark or a simple opinion. They represented a culmination of years of growing frustration among a segment of the American political landscape that questions the prevailing bipartisan consensus supporting extensive U.S. military and financial support for Israel, and that raises concerns about the degree to which such support is shaped not purely by American strategic interests, but by the lobbying power of organizations like AIPAC. She highlighted how this lobbying group, through a combination of financial contributions, political pressure, and behind-the-scenes influence, effectively directs congressional attitudes, votes, and foreign policy stances, often sidelining the broader concerns of the American populace, who might see such involvement as both costly and misaligned with U.S. interests. Especially at a time when many Americans face pressing domestic challenges such as economic instability, infrastructure decay, and social unrest, Greene's remarks underscored a broader debate over the nature of sovereignty and democratic accountability in the United States, specifically whether elected representatives are serving the will of their constituents or whether they have become captive to well-funded foreign lobbying interests that shape policy decisions in ways that may not always be transparent or in the best interest of American citizens. This issue touches on constitutional principles and the democratic ideal that a government must be responsive to its people. But as Greene pointed out, the reality often appears more complicated, with lobbying groups like AIPAC wielding outsized influence through financial clout and strategic alliances that extend deep into political institutions. Moreover, this dynamic raises critical questions about the transparency of political financing and the ethics of foreign influence within the United States, matters that have historically sparked controversy and prompted calls for reform, but remain stubbornly entrenched in the political process. Greene's critique also aligns with a rising faction within American conservatism and populism that champions an America First foreign policy approach, arguing that the United States should prioritize its own national interests above all else and reevaluate or even reduce its commitments to foreign nations, particularly when those commitments involve large sums of taxpayer money and the potential for military entanglements that do not directly serve American security or prosperity. This viewpoint is gaining momentum partly as a reaction against what many perceive as perpetual U.S. involvement in overseas conflicts that drain resources and cost American lives without clear benefits or exit strategies. Tucker Carlson's platform amplifies this narrative by offering a critical lens on the intersection of power, money, and political influence in Washington, particularly in the realm of foreign policy, bringing these complex issues to a broad audience that feels increasingly alienated from the political establishment and skeptical of traditional bipartisan agreements that have shaped American foreign relations for decades. Furthermore, Greene's comments open the door to a deeper examination of how foreign lobbying intersects with media influence, policymaker incentives, and public opinion, creating a feedback loop that often perpetuates certain foreign policy positions without sufficient scrutiny or debate. Building on the critique of foreign influence and lobbying dominance discussed earlier, the conversation on Tucker Carlson Tonight then shifted to the political landscape closer to home, focusing on the upcoming New York City mayoral election. A contest Greene argued could symbolize a larger ideological battle unfolding across the nation. Greene expressed deep concerns about the possibility of a progressive candidate taking control of one of America's largest and most influential cities, warning that such a shift might herald a troubling transformation in urban governance, with potential consequences that extend far beyond the city limits. She painted a vivid picture of a city grappling with escalating crime rates, worsening homelessness, and significant economic challenges, problems that critics often associate with progressive policies focused on criminal justice reform, expansive social welfare programs, and regulatory approaches that some argue stifle business growth and exacerbate housing shortages. This critique ties into a broader national debate about urban management and the role of government in addressing, or failing to address, the complex social and economic issues faced by metropolitan areas. Green's perspective taps into a growing frustration among many Americans who feel that the promises of progressive governance have often resulted in unintended negative consequences such as increased public safety concerns and strained municipal budgets. Her warnings resonate with audiences who fear that progressive leadership might prioritize ideological goals over pragmatic solutions, leading to further decline in quality of life and economic opportunity in major cities. Moreover, the discussion highlighted the significance of local elections as bellwethers for national political trends, with the New York mayoral race seen not merely as a local contest, but as a proxy for larger ideological battles between conservatives and progressives nationwide. Green and Carlson underscored how the policies enacted in city halls can influence national politics by shaping public perceptions of governance, impacting voter behavior, and setting precedents that other municipalities might follow. This focus on local governance challenges the common tendency to concentrate solely on federal politics, reminding viewers that political power and policy outcomes are deeply affected by decisions made at all levels of government. Additionally, the segment touched upon the cultural and social dynamics driving the urban electorate, including debates around law enforcement, affordable housing, and economic revitalization, all of which are deeply interconnected with broader ideological divides. Green's commentary suggested that the outcome of this election could either reinforce or challenge the dominant narratives about urban progressivism and its capacity to manage complex city challenges effectively. This segment also raised important questions about voter engagement and political representation in large cities, where diverse populations often have competing priorities, and where political messaging can be both highly localized and emblematic of national sentiments. Tucker Carlson's platform thus served as a critical venue for exploring these multifaceted issues, providing a space for dialogue that transcends partisan soundbites and encourages a nuanced understanding of how local and national politics intersect. By highlighting the stakes of the New York mayoral election through Green's eyes, the show invited viewers to consider not only the policy implications but also the broader ideological currents shaping American political life today, and how those currents might influence the country's future trajectory. Continuing the exploration of political influence and power dynamics, Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene then turned their attention to one of the most contentious and pressing issues in contemporary American politics: the role of so-called warmongers within the political establishment and media ecosystem who, according to Greene, are actively seeking to pull former President Donald Trump and the broader Republican movement into adopting interventionist, aggressive foreign policies that risk entangling the United States in unnecessary and costly military conflicts. Greene's remarks struck a chord with a growing segment of conservative and populist Americans who have grown increasingly skeptical of endless wars and foreign interventions, sentiments that have been amplified by decades of military engagements in the Middle East and elsewhere, which many argue have failed to produce lasting peace or tangible benefits for American citizens. She accused certain political actors, defense contractors, and media personalities of pushing a hawkish agenda that prioritizes profit, power, and geopolitical influence over the lives of American service members and the fiscal health of the nation. This critique reflects broader anxieties about the military-industrial complex, a term famously coined by President Dwight D. Eisenhower, which refers to the close relationship between a country's military, its government, and the industries that supply defense equipment and services, often leading to conflicts of interest and policy decisions driven more by economic incentives than strategic necessity. Greene's warning about attempts to co-opt Trump into this warmonger camp taps into the ongoing struggle within the Republican Party and conservative circles between interventionist foreign policy advocates and those who push for a more restrained America First approach that emphasizes diplomacy, national sovereignty, and avoiding costly foreign entanglements. This division has profound implications for the future direction of U.S. foreign policy, especially given Trump's significant influence over the conservative base and his own complex positions on military intervention. Tucker Carlson's platform serves as a crucial venue for airing these debates, providing space for voices that question the mainstream narrative supporting continued American military presence abroad. Moreover, Green's commentary raises critical questions about media responsibility and the narratives constructed around national security, as many outlets tend to frame foreign policy through a lens that favors interventionism, often marginalizing dissenting opinions that call for caution and restraint. The discussion also connects to wider concerns about accountability in government decision-making related to war and peace, the transparency of intelligence assessments, and the role of Congress in authorizing military action. By confronting these issues head-on, Carlson and Green invite viewers to critically evaluate who benefits from prolonged conflicts and whether current policies truly reflect the interests and values of the American people, or instead serve entrenched elites and special interests. This segment thus not only highlights the internal conflicts within the GOP, but also situates the broader debate over American foreign policy within a historical continuum of tension between isolationism and interventionism, a theme that has shaped U.S. politics since the country's founding. Ultimately, Green's pointed critique calls for a reassessment of America's global role, urging a shift away from perpetual warfare toward a foreign policy that prioritizes peace, sovereignty, and the well-being of American citizens above geopolitical ambitions or the agendas of powerful lobbying groups and defense contractors. Continuing the in-depth exploration of the political dynamics shaping America's present and future, Tucker Carlson Tonight emphasized the vital necessity of fostering a political environment where truth, accountability, and a genuine prioritization of national interest are the guiding principles behind policy decisions. Marjorie Taylor Greene's pointed and unapologetic critiques throughout the episode reflect a growing undercurrent within the American conservative and populist movements, a demand for leadership that refuses to bend to political expediency or the interests of entrenched power brokers, lobbyists, or foreign entities, no matter how influential they may be. This growing faction of the electorate calls for a renewed focus on principled governance, one that questions the unquestionable, challenges the accepted orthodoxies, and centers on the needs and sovereignty of the American people, rather than the agendas of powerful external and internal players. Whether it is Greene's indictment of AIPAC's significant influence over congressional foreign policy, her skepticism toward the efficacy of progressive urban leadership in managing crises like crime and homelessness, or her warning against the push by interventionist warmongers seeking to entangle the U.S. in costly foreign conflicts, these critiques collectively highlight the urgency of reevaluating the foundations of American policy both at home and abroad. At the heart of this demand for principled leadership lies a broader ideological shift within American conservatism, a movement increasingly defined by economic nationalism, skepticism of globalization, and a reaffirmation of sovereignty. This shift challenges the long-standing bipartisan consensus that has, for decades, favored extensive American engagement in global affairs and the maintenance of alliances that some argue come at the expense of domestic priorities. Green and Carlson's discussion revealed how this shift is not merely a reaction to specific policies, but a fundamental questioning of the relationship between the American state and its citizens, raising critical issues about democratic accountability, transparency in political financing, and the role of special interests in shaping national policy. The episode explored the persistent tension between reform-minded populism, which seeks to dismantle or at least significantly reform the entrenched interests that dominate the political landscape, and the political establishment, which often resists change to preserve its influence and power. This tension plays out across all levels of governance, from the corridors of Congress and Washington think tanks to local city halls and community boards, illustrating how interconnected and complex the struggle for genuine representation truly is. Moreover, Green and Carlson highlighted the challenges faced by those pushing for this new vision of American politics, particularly in a media environment that frequently marginalizes dissenting voices or frames political debates in ways that obscure the underlying issues. They stressed the importance of critical engagement with media narratives and information sources, encouraging viewers to question the framing of topics such as foreign policy, urban governance, and political lobbying. By cultivating a more informed and discerning electorate, The show aims to empower citizens to demand greater transparency and accountability from their elected representatives. This includes calling out the influence of well-funded lobbying groups whose priorities may not align with those of the broader public, exposing the often opaque ways in which policy is influenced and pushing for reforms that strengthen democratic oversight. The episode further connected these political critiques to the larger cultural and ideological battles underway in America today. As the discussion on Tucker Carlson Tonight progressed into its 7th segment, the focus broadened to address the cultural and societal consequences stemming from the political and ideological battles previously examined, underscoring how shifts in governance, foreign policy, and lobbying influence resonate deeply within the American social fabric. Marjorie Taylor Greene and Tucker Carlson explored how the growing divide between populist, America First advocates and entrenched political elites not only shapes policy outcomes but also fundamentally impacts the national psyche, identity, and cohesion. They emphasized that the debates surrounding foreign alliances, urban governance, and military interventionism are inseparable from larger cultural questions about who Americans are as a people, what values they hold dear, and how those values are expressed in public life and policy. Greene highlighted the frustration felt by many citizens who perceive that their voices are drowned out by powerful interests and media narratives that do not reflect their lived experiences or priorities, contributing to a sense of alienation and mistrust toward institutions. This alienation, in turn, fuels polarization and creates fertile ground for social fragmentation, as communities and political factions retreat into echo chambers that reinforce divisions rather than foster understanding. Carlson echoed these concerns by discussing how the media landscape often amplifies conflicts and sensationalizes disagreements, exacerbating cultural tensions and deepening misunderstandings between different segments of the population. Together, they called for a renewed focus on dialogue and common ground, suggesting that meaningful political reform must be accompanied by efforts to heal the social fabric through increased civic engagement, education, and a recommitment to shared national principles. This approach, they argued, is essential to bridging divides and restoring trust in democratic institutions, enabling the country to confront its challenges with unity rather than fragmentation. Furthermore, the segment examined the role of education and cultural institutions in shaping national identity and political consciousness, critiquing what they see as ideological indoctrination and advocating for curricula that promote critical thinking, historical awareness, and patriotic values. They posited that the future of American democracy depends not only on policy and leadership, but on cultivating a citizenry that is well-informed, engaged, and deeply connected to the nation's founding ideals. The conversation also touched on the implications of demographic and social changes within the United States, including shifts in immigration patterns, economic inequality, and technological disruption, all of which interact with political dynamics in complex ways. Greene and Carlson argued that these factors must be addressed holistically, recognizing their interconnectedness and the necessity of policies that balance economic opportunity, social cohesion, and national security. They warned against simplistic solutions or partisan scapegoating, advocating instead for thoughtful, evidence-based approaches grounded in respect for American values and the realities of contemporary life. Throughout this part of the discussion, the underlying theme was clear. America's political and cultural future hinges on the ability of its leaders and citizens to navigate complexity with wisdom, courage, and a shared commitment to the nation's enduring principles. The conversation on Tucker Carlson Tonight took a compelling and necessary turn into the economic realm, addressing one of the most pressing and yet deeply intertwined challenges confronting the American nation today: the profound transformation of the U.S. economy under the forces of globalization, technological innovation, and decades of shifting trade and industrial policies that have, arguably, redefined the landscape of opportunity, security, and prosperity for millions of Americans. Marjorie Taylor Greene's commentary illuminated the frustration and anxiety felt by large segments of the population who have witnessed the erosion of well-paying manufacturing jobs, the decline of middle-class stability, and the rise of economic precarity in regions once considered the backbone of American industrial might. Her arguments underscored a growing movement within conservative and populist circles that calls for an economic nationalism designed to reclaim and restore America's economic sovereignty, a project centered on protecting domestic industries, revitalizing manufacturing, and reasserting control over critical supply chains, all while resisting the unchecked influence of multinational corporations whose interests often diverge sharply from those of everyday American workers. This narrative is not merely a reflection of economic distress, but also a direct challenge to the prevailing orthodoxy of free trade agreements, deregulation, and neoliberal globalization that has dominated policy discourse since the late 20th century. Green and Carlson dissected how policies such as NAFTA, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and various World Trade Organization rulings have systematically shifted jobs and capital overseas, contributing to the hollowing out of the American heartland and widening income inequality. This economic restructuring, they argue, has disproportionately harmed blue-collar workers in rural communities, creating deep regional disparities that fuel political realignment and cultural backlash. The show highlighted how these economic grievances translate directly into political behavior, with many voters embracing candidates who promise to put America first by renegotiating trade deals, imposing tariffs, and incentivizing domestic production. Green's emphasis on supporting small businesses and American innovation reflects a broader populist impulse to democratize economic power and reduce dependence on global supply chains that are perceived as vulnerable and susceptible to geopolitical disruption. The discussion further explored the intersection of economic policy with technological change, particularly automation, artificial intelligence, and digitization, and the mixed consequences these forces have on the labor market. While innovation promises efficiency and new opportunities, it also threatens to displace workers and deepen divides between high-skilled and low-skilled labor. Carlson and Green argued for proactive government intervention in retraining and education to ensure that workers are not left behind in this new economy. They stressed the necessity of balancing innovation with social safety nets and economic policies that foster inclusive growth, warning that failure to address these challenges risks entrenching economic inequality and social fragmentation. Importantly, the conversation scrutinized the impact of globalization not only on jobs and industries but also on democratic governance itself. Green and Carlson contended that ceding too much economic power to international institutions and multinational corporations weakens national sovereignty and undermines the ability of elected officials to respond effectively to their constituents' needs. They highlighted concerns about regulatory capture and the way in which complex international trade rules can limit the government's ability to implement protective measures or social policies deemed necessary by the populace. The intricate tapestry of America's challenges continued to unravel as the conversation turned toward the critical issue of national security and its entanglement with the political, economic, and cultural dimensions previously explored. Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene underscored how national security, far from being an isolated domain of defense and intelligence, is deeply interconnected with questions of economic sovereignty, foreign policy, and democratic integrity. They emphasize that the nation's ability to protect itself hinges not only on military strength, but also on securing supply chains, safeguarding critical infrastructure, and preserving technological leadership, all areas vulnerable to the destabilizing effects of globalization and foreign interference. Green's critique of unrestrained interventionism dovetailed with concerns about maintaining a robust defense posture that prioritizes genuine threats rather than endless overseas entanglements that drain resources and political capital. The show argued that a recalibrated national security strategy must be rooted in realism and restraint, focusing on protecting America's borders, interests, and institutions from both external adversaries and internal vulnerabilities. Further elaborating on this theme, the segment highlighted the increasingly blurred lines between economic competition and national security, especially in the context of rising tensions with China and other global powers. Green and Carlson discussed how dependency on foreign manufacturing, particularly for critical technologies like semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, and rare earth minerals, poses a strategic risk that can undermine America's ability to respond effectively in times of crisis. They advocated for policies that promote domestic production and innovation, reduce reliance on potentially hostile foreign entities, and build resilient supply chains capable of withstanding geopolitical shocks. This economic national security nexus was framed as a crucial front in the broader struggle for American sovereignty and influence, requiring a comprehensive approach that integrates diplomatic, economic, and defense tools. The conversation also addressed concerns about espionage, cyber warfare, and the evolving nature of threats in the digital age. Green warned against complacency in confronting cyber vulnerabilities that expose governmental, corporate, and personal data to exploitation by adversaries, calling for robust investment in cybersecurity measures and greater coordination among public and private sectors. Carlson expanded on how information warfare and propaganda campaigns by foreign actors seek to undermine public trust and destabilize American democracy, reinforcing earlier themes about the fragility of national cohesion and the importance of media literacy. They argued that protecting the nation now demands a broad conception of security that includes cultural resilience and the safeguarding of democratic institutions from manipulation and subversion. In addition to these external threats, the episode turned inward to examine how domestic policies and political divisions impact national security. Green and Carlson pointed out that internal discord, politicization of defense priorities, and waning support for military personnel erode the country's capacity to respond to challenges effectively. They stressed the importance of fostering national unity, strengthening support for service members, and ensuring that military and intelligence agencies remain insulated from partisan battles. The show also touched on the controversies surrounding military readiness, defense spending, and the role of the United States on the global stage, advocating for a clear-eyed strategy that balances strength with prudence and reflects the nation's core interests.